Next.js. Create fast, search engine optimized React apps with zero configuration. A traditional React app is rendered client-side, where the browser starts with a shell of an HTML page lacking any rendered content. From there, the browser fetches the JavaScript file containing the React code to render content to the page and make it interactive. But there are two major drawbacks with client-side rendering. One, the content is not reliably indexed by all search engines or read by social media link bots. And two, it can take longer to reach the first contentful paint when a user first lands on the web page. Next is a framework that allows you to build a React app, but render the content in advance on the server, so the first thing a user or a search bot sees is the fully rendered HTML. After receiving this initial page, client-side rendering takes over and it works just like a traditional React app. It's the best of both worlds, fully rendered content for bots, highly interactive content for users. Inside of a Next project, you have a pages directory. Each JavaScript file defined here exports a React component that represents a route in the application. In other words, the file structure here mirrors the actual URLs that the user will navigate to, and Next provides its own router to make navigation seamless. But the real magic comes into play when we talk about data fetching, because Next can perform multiple server rendering strategies from a single project. Static generation, or pre-rendering, allows you to render your pages at build time. Each page or component can implement a function called getStaticProps. It might fetch data from a cloud database, then pass the data as props to the component. You can then build your app to render. Find here exports a React component that represents a route in the application. In other words, the file structure here mirrors the actual URLs that the user will navigate to, and Next provides its own router to make navigation seamless. But the real magic comes into play when we talk about data fetching, because Next can perform multiple server rendering strategies from a single project. Static generation, or pre-rendering, allows you to render your pages at build time. Each page or component can implement a function called getStaticProps. It might fetch data from a cloud database, then pass the data as props to the component. You can then build your app to render out perform multiple server rendering strategies from a single project. Static generation, or pre-rendering, allows you to render your pages at build time. Each page or component can implement a function called getStaticProject. Static generation or pre-rendering allows you to render your pages at build time. Each page or component can implement a function called getStaticProps. It might fetch data from a cloud database, then pass the data as props to the component. You can then build your app to render out all of the HTML locally and a function called getStaticProps. It might fetch data from a cloud database, then pass the data as props to the component. You can then build your app to render out all of the HTML locally and upload it to a storage bucket where it can be easily cached by a CDN. That works great for a blog or any kind of app where the data doesn't change often. But if the data does change often, you can implement server-side rendering, which builds the HTML page each time it's requested by the user. In the component, we implement data fetching with the getServerSideProps function. Instead of running at build time, this function runs at request time. That means the page will fetch the latest data on the server each time a new request request comes in. That's great for pages with rapidly changing data, but maybe you want something in between. Yet another option is incremental static regeneration. By simply adding a revalidate option to get static props, Next can regenerate a page whenever a new request comes in within a certain time interval. This has been Next.js in 100 seconds. If you want to see more short videos like this, open up VS Code and get ready to go beyond 100 seconds with a full breakdown of Next. My goal over the next few minutes is to teach you the fundamentals of Next while also explaining the complexities of server-side rendering. To follow along, open up the terminal and run npx create next app followed by the name of your app. And if you get lost at any point, make sure to grab the source code on GitHub or Fireship.io. Let's open up the project in VS Code and then go into the package.json file. In development, the only script we need to worry about is dev, which you can execute by running npm run dev from the command line, which will run our app on localhost 3000. That should give you the default boilerplate in the browser. Now, before we get into the React code, there's a few things that I want to point out. First, in the styles directory here, you'll notice how Next supports CSS modules. In the globals file, you can define styles that apply to the entire application. But in other files with .module, you can define classes that only apply to a specific route or component. And you don't have to worry about coming up with a bunch of unique class names or naming conventions when managing your styles. If you want to use styles from a certain module, you just import the style sheet in your JavaScript, then reference your styles in JSX as if the styles were a JavaScript object. That's pretty awesome, but from there, let's shift our attention over to the pages directory. Inside this directory, we define all of the pages and routes for the application. At the highest level, we have this underscore app.js file, which is like the main entry point into the app. In other words, every individual page will start from this template. Currently, the application only has one page, which points to the root URL and is defined by the component in the index.js file. When a user navigates to this URL, Next will find the default export, which is a React component, in this file. So every file or page in your application needs to have one default export. To demonstrate this further, let's create our first route. In the pages directory this template. Currently, the application only has one page, which points to the root URL and is defined by the component in the index.js file. When a user navigates to this URL, Next will find the default export which is a React component in this file. So every file or page in your application needs to have one default export. To demonstrate this further, let's create our first route. In the pages directory, create a new file called hello.js. Then we can define the content of this page by exporting a default React component from it. From there, we can go back to the browser and navigate to localhost 3000/hello, and we should get the content of that component. Congratulations, you just built your first web page with Next. But now let's imagine a route that's a little more complex. We have a cars route that should show a list of cars, then an infinite number of cars that might be dynamically generated under that URL. We can implement a dynamic route like that by first creating a cars directory. Then inside the directory, we'll add an index.js file, which will show the main list of cars. Then for each individual car, we'll add a component that has a file name of brackets paramname.js. The brackets make this route dynamic, which means anytime a user navigates to cars/whatever or cars/Tesla, it will render the component in this file. To see that in action, let's go ahead and implement the component logic. In the index file, we'll just add a placeholder for the cars list for now. But in the dynamic component, we'll import the useRouter hook from the Next router. It allows us to access the query parameters from the URL. In this example, the value is ID, but you can give it a name of whatever you want. And then we'll render that value out to the template. Now back in the browser, if we go to the cars URL, it renders out the cars component. Then if we add any string after the cars URL, it renders out the dynamic component. Now, one other thing you may have noticed in the pages directory is this API directory. Let's go ahead and implement the component logic. In the index file, we'll just add a placeholder for the cars list for now. But in the dynamic component, we'll import the useRouter hook from the Next router. It allows us to access the query parameters from the URL. In this example, the value is ID, but you can give it a name of whatever you want. And then we'll render that value out to the template. Now back in the browser, if we go to the cars URL, it renders out the cars component. Then if we add any string after the cars URL, it renders out the dynamic component. Now, one other thing you may have noticed in the pages directory is this API directory. So what is that all about? The API directory is a special part of Next for setting up routes that will only apply to the server. That can be useful because the code you write here won't increase the client-side JavaScript bundle that needs to ultimately be sent over the network. We're not going to get into API routes in this video, but just know that it's a useful feature when you have work that needs to be done on the back end, or if you simply want to expose an API for your end users. But now, let's shift our attention over to the most valuable feature in Next, which of course is data fetching. Next allows us to fetch data and render HTML on the server. And again, the benefit of doing that is that the end user gets rendered content quicker, and the content can be reliably crawled by search bots and social media link bots. Now, when it comes to server rendering, there are two main options: static generation and server-side rendering. Static generation is also called pre-rendering because you generate all of the HTML at build time. It makes life very simple because you generate a bunch of HTML files, then upload them to a storage bucket or static host, and they can be delivered with very high performance over a CDN. But there's a couple of big trade-offs here. The first one is that your data may become stale. If the data on the server changes, you need to rebuild and redeploy your site in order for those changes to be reflected. Another important trade-off to think about is scale. If your website has 1 million pages, it'll be very slow and difficult to pre-render all of them. That makes static generation most well suited for data that doesn't change often and for sites that have a relatively low number of total pages. A good example would be a blog, because it might have a few hundred pages and those pages likely don't change on a daily basis. Let's go ahead and take a look at how we might implement static generation in Next. In the car component, let's imagine we need to fetch data from an external source, like a database or API. To simulate that for the demo, I've added a couple of JSON files to the public directory. We have a file that returns an array of IDs, then an individual response for each car, which contains an image and other data about the car. Now we can fetch this data for the car component by implementing the getStaticProps function inside the component file. When you build your site, Next will automatically call this function, then send the result as props to the component itself. What we want to do here is fetch the JSON for an individual car so it can be used in the HTML or UI for the car page. In this case, we need the ID from the URL to know which car was requested. We can get that information from the params argument in the function. Then from there, we'll use the fetch API to make a request to localhost to request the JSON file with that ID. We can then convert it to JSON. Then the final step is to return an object that has a props property where each prop can then be accessed by the component. Up in the component code, we can destructure the car prop and then use it in the JSX, which I'm doing here by adding an image tag, which relies on the data fetched by the server as the image source. Now, if you're concerned about search engine optimization, you likely want to add an SEO-friendly title as well as structure the car prop and then use it in the JSX. Which I'm doing here by adding an image tag, which relies on the data fetched by the server as the image source. Now, if you're concerned about search engine optimization, you likely want to add an SEO-friendly title as well as meta tags to the head of the document. Next makes that very easy to accomplish by simply importing that. a head component. Anything inside this component will be rendered out to the head of the document. Like in this case, we add a title with the car color and ID. And we could also add meta tags for Twitter and Facebook cards if we wanted to. Now, because we're working with a dynamic route, there's one other thing we have to keep in mind, and that's the fact that Next has no way of knowing how many pages we actually have associated to a dynamic route. In order to pre-render all of the car IDs, Next needs to know those IDs in advance. And the way we provide that information is by implementing the getStaticPaths function. This function can also request data from an API or database, then its job is to return a paths object that contains an array with every route for this dynamic URL. In this demo, we only have 3 routes: Tesla, Ford, and Lambo. We map those values to an array of objects, then return them from the function, along with additional options like the fallback behavior. Now, if we go visit the app in the browser, we should see a fully rendered web page. It doesn't look any different than a regular React app. However, if you open up the Sources panel in Chrome DevTools, it'll show you the fully rendered HTML before it was touched by JavaScript. Notice how it contains the title and pre-rendered content, which is essential for SEO and sharing content on social media sites. So that's how you implement server-side generation. But another big strategy is server-side rendering. The big difference is that with SSR, the content is generated on a server when requested by the user. This approach is ideal when data changes constantly because it ensures the end user will always get the latest and greatest data from whatever your data source happens to be. However, it's far less efficient because you need to have a server in place to respond to those requests, as opposed to caching everything on a global CDN. Imagine something like an eBay auction where you have millions of listings and those listings are changing all the time. That's probably a good candidate for SSR. In any case, it's very easy to implement in Next. Back in our page file, we'll go ahead and implement another function called get server-side props. The only thing that actually changes in our code is the name of the function. We can simply copy the body of the get static props function and paste it into our new function. It does the exact same thing, but does it on every request instead of at build time. Then we can comment out get static props and get static paths because we no longer need those functions. But the real beauty of Next is that we can apply both of these paradigms wherever we want in the application. We're not limited to one or the other. I'm going to go ahead and wrap things up there. If there's anything you want to see in my next course, make sure to let me know in the comments. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next
but crucial. You must stay informed about where the industry is heading and what new technologies are being released. In 2013, Facebook introduced React, a groundbreaking technology that revolutionized web development and created countless job opportunities. Fast forward to 2023, and believe it or not, the official React documentation now suggests never to use plain React again. Instead, it recommends to build new apps by picking one of the React-powered frameworks popular in community. Interestingly, the first framework that they recommend is none other than Next.js. And for that reason, I have prepared a special paid resource you can get completely for free, the Ultimate Next.js 13 ebook that covers everything you need to know to become a... Let me start with a very important first question. What does Next.js have that React doesn't? In simple words, Next.js simplifies the development process, and on top of that, it optimizes your web applications. It does that through its primary features. Let's explore them one by one. First on the list, rendering. It all begins with the rendering process. The primary distinction between React.js and Next.js lies in how they handle rendering. You may already know that React React.js renders user interface on the client side, while Next.js performs server-side rendering. However, Next.js offers flexibility in rendering options. You can choose to render the UI on the client side or the server side according to your needs. Of course, the main question is, what is client-side and server-side rendering, and which one is better? Client-side rendering or browser rendering happens on the client's device, or the browser. When a user requests a web page, the server sends a basic HTML document and JavaScript code. The browser then downloads and executes the JavaScript code, which leads to the rendering of components and finally the display of the website. On the other hand, server-side rendering involves rendering the web page on the server before transmitting it to the client's device. When a user requests a page, the server processes the request and renders the components on the server side. The server then sends back the fully rendered HTML to the client's browser, enabling immediate display. This distinction highlights an essential aspect of web development: SEO, search engine optimization. Search engine crawlers face difficulties indexing pages dynamically rendered on the client side. As a result, the SEO performance of such pages may suffer, as search engines may not fully comprehend their content and rank them appropriately. By utilizing Next.js, this issue is resolved by sending pre-rendered code directly to the client. This enables easy crawling and indexing by search engines, leading to the improved SEO. But now you might wonder, why should I prioritize SEO? SEO is crucial for optimizing websites' visibility and ranking in search engine results. By focusing on SEO, you can achieve several benefits, including increased organic traffic, enhanced user experience, credibility and trustworthiness, and competitive advantage due to higher search result rankings. Prioritizing SEO can greatly impact the success of your
Hi there, I'm Rachel, and I'm a senior tech.
Website and its online presence. The second great Next.js feature is routing. How do we create different page routes in React? We have to install an additional package called React Router DOM and then create routes in one of the files. That's pretty simple, right? But then how do we create routes in Next.js? Next.js uses a file-based routing system, which means that the routing is handled by the file system. Each folder in the app directory becomes a route, and the folder name becomes the route's path. For example, if you have a folder named About in the app directory, you can access that page at the /about path. Isn't that so easy? No need for external packages or complex configurations. You can create files for the routes you want and immediately open them within your application. Of course, we're going to explore this in much more detail later on once we dive into the build of our own Next.js application. Another huge Next.js feature is its ability to create full stack applications. From Next.js version 9, developers behind Next introduced a new feature called API routes, enabling the creation of serverless functions to handle API requests. Serverless APIs in Next.js are a way of creating API endpoints without the need for a traditional server. It allows us to build and deploy APIs without managing server infrastructure or worrying about scaling your server as the traffic increases. With this feature, you can create an API endpoint by simply creating a file called route.js in a specific folder within the app directory. This file in any route segment of the app directly corresponds to that route API endpoint. Once again, we're going to dive deeper into that once we move to a real project. One of the vice presidents of developer experience at Vercel, Lee Robinson, mentioned in his blog post that moving from a typical React Express Webpack backend to Next.js resulted in removing 20,000+ lines of code and 30+ dependencies, while improving hot module reloading from 1.3 seconds to 131 milliseconds, which is 10 times less. Of course, in the demo that follows, I'm going to show you how to utilize Next.js's full stack capabilities. The next feature on our list of awesome Next.js features is automatic code splitting. Code splitting is a technique that breaks down large bundles of JavaScript code into smaller, more manageable chunks that can be loaded as needed. That's the key word here, when needed. This reduces the initial load time of a website and optimizes the user's experience while browsing. While we can achieve code splitting in React, the process is manual. We have to do lots of configuration as your application grows. For example, we need to use the lazy function from React to dynamically import the about component only when it's needed. We also use the suspense component to show a fallback UI when the component is being loaded. But in Next.js, this process is entirely automatic, no need for any code. It uses automatic code splitting by default to split pages into separate chunks. When a user navigates to another page, only the code required for that page is loaded, resulting in faster subsequent page navigations. So, what's the takeaway? Front-end development has gone through various advancements in areas like linting, formatting, compiling, bundling, minifying, deploying, and many more. However, to avoid the time spent configuring these tools, developers felt a need for a framework that would take care of most of the process automatically, leaving them to concentrate on the actual code. That's where Next.js comes in, automating most of the remaining processes and letting us focus on building the essential business logic of the application. And for the end, Next.js's final advantage. It's still just React. Next.js is not an entirely new technology. It is still fundamentally built on top of React. Its purpose is to simplify certain tasks, allowing developers to concentrate on the core React code. Next.js manages a variety variety of features such as routing, code splitting, search engine optimization, and rendering automatically. This automation saves a considerable amount of time, reducing the effort required to build a React application from the ground up. To put it simply, Next.js is an extension of React that streamlines the development process by automating several functions, allowing developers to focus on what they do best: writing React code. In the end, it's all React. And with that said, hopefully you're now hooked for what next. In this case, we want to say yes, because this feature won't be experimental for too long. The Next.js team has plans to launch it as a stable version in a couple of months. So let's say yes. Started. Now let's set up the project that we'll be working on in this video. I'll first provide a practical explanation of all of these features, after which we'll immediately begin working on the project. To get started, you can create a new folder on your desktop and call it something like share_prompts. Because in your app, you'll be able to share great prompts that people can use within ChatGPT. Finally, open up an empty Visual Studio Code window and then drag and drop your empty folder in. Within your VS Code, go to View and then Terminal. This is going to open up an integrated Visual Studio Code terminal. Inside of there, you want to type npx create-next-app add latest, and then type /. This will ensure to create your next application within the current repository. Now, you could get a prompt to say, hey, do you want to install create next app? Simply press enter to say yes. After that, it's going to ask you, would you like to use TypeScript on this project? Let's say no. Would you like to use ESLint? In this case, we're going to also say no. Would you like to use Tailwind? We're going to say yes, we do. Then it's going to ask you, would you like to use the src directory? In this case, we're going to say no. And then it's going to ask you, would you like to use the experimental app directory with this project? In this case, we want to say yes, because this feature won't be experimental for too long. The Next.js team has plans to launch it as a stable version. In most cases, that's going to be your navbar and footer. Additionally, the layout.js file also allows you to customize the appearance of your HTML document. So you can set things like language, and you can also modify the metadata for all the pages, as well as add script tags, links, or even fonts, as it is done in this case. In a nutshell, if you want to add something that should stay consistent across all routes, such as navbar, footer, or Redux Toolkit wrapper, you should place it in the layout.js file. Next to the layout, we have the page.js file. The purpose of the page.js file is that it simply represents the home page route of the application, i.e., it's what you see if you go to localhost 3000 /. That is the page you see once you visit. In this case, it's just a typical boilerplate code. And next to the page, we have the globals.css. That file contains the global CSS styles of the entire application. In here, you can see that it has been imported within the layout file so that every single route inherits it. As you can see, in here we have the Tailwind imports, which will help us utilize Tailwind within our application. Now, this page that you can see right here, even though it looks like a normal React functional component, it is being rendered as something known as a server-side component. React 18 and Next 13 introduced new ways to rendering your components. There are two environments where your application code can be rendered: the client and the server. By default, it's just that question. To simplify the decision between server and client components, we recommend using server components default in the app directory until you have a need to use a client component. Essentially, just keep doing what you're doing. When you have an error, just transform it into a use client component. Now, just below, they provide us with a table that explains on when you might want to use server components and when to use client components. Whenever you're fetching any data, like article, blog posts, or website data, you want to use server-side components. Whenever you access any backend resources directly, use server-side. Whenever you have any sensitive information on the server, access tokens, API keys, use server-side components. And whenever you want to reduce the client-side JavaScript. Now, when should you use client-side components? When you have some interactivity or event listeners, such as onClick or onChange. In that case, make it a client-side. Whenever you're using useState and lifecycle effects, useState, useReducer, useEffect, use client-side. Whenever you use some custom hooks that depend on state, effects, or browser-only APIs, or if you use React class components. I hope that this provided you with just a bit of clarity on when you should use server and when client-side components. To put it in simple words, just let Next.js do its thing, out of the box, make it server-side, but then when you want to use some React capabilities like useState, useEffect, or interactivity, then simply add that use client string on top. It is as simple as that. Now, let's focus on Next.js's routing system. All you need to do to implement the routing in Next.js
Bonjour à tous, welcome back to Lingoni. My name is Alicia and today we'll talk about food, la nourriture. That's the first difficult word of this lesson, nourriture. Check how it's written and remember how it's pronounced, nourriture. Okay? So it's it doesn't really come from the verb manger. It's a complete different word, nourriture, and it's a long one. D'accord, donc food and meals. I thought to not give you random food vocab, first because it's a lot and I'm obviously not giving you everything but only the main and important things, I think. I will divide like the type of food that you eat at each meal. Meal in French is repas. Repas. So we have like 4 main meals, 4 repas principaux. In the morning we talk about le petit déjeuner. You might have heard this word already. Le petit déjeuner. So for breakfast, for example, you could eat un œuf, an egg, ou des œufs, very careful. With the pronunciation. Un œuf ou des œufs. Un fruit. Fruit written like in English, but we do pronounce the I and we do not pronounce the final T. So you say fruit, you say fruit. Un fruit. And you can count like fruit in French, like un fruit, des fruits, 5 fruits, and you can put it in singular or in plural. It's not uncountable like in English, that's what I mean. Un fruit or le fruit, masculin singulier. D'accord? Un jus de fruits frais or un jus de fruits pressé. That goes with the verb boire. Donc le matin, pour le petit déjeuner or au petit déjeuner, it's the same. Je mange un œuf, je mange un fruit et je bois, verbe boire, un jus de fruits pressé. Very difficult pronunciation wise, I think. Je bois un jus de fruits pressé. You've got a nasal sound with un, jus, le closed U, jus is a juice, de, the neutral E, French E, fruit with the tough R, closed U, and T that you do not pronounce, fruit, pressé, again the French R. That's a good sentence to practice, I think. Vous pouvez aussi manger, you can also eat Des céréales avec du lait. Des céréales avec du lait. In French, le lait masculine. A very common thing to have for breakfast in France too are viennoiseries. What are the viennoiseries? It's all this chocolate croissant delight. Pain au chocolat is a famous one. It's the best. Pain au chocolat. Et le croissant, bien sûr, le croissant, without chocolate, you know le croissant. Croissant, pain au chocolat, brioche, all these are included in viennoiserie and it's quite common to have that in the morning too. Ou une tartine, a toast, avec du beurre, ou de la confiture, marmalade. seeds, or du miel. Miel is honey. D'accord. And the verbs I would associate to that are manger, boire, cuisiner, préparer maybe, presser when we were talking about the fresh fruit juice, presser les fruits. Okay, that was for the petit déjeuner. And we've already seen a bit of vocab. I can tell you're thinking, yeah, but fruit, can you give us some fruit? I will, but I'll do that the very end of the lesson, and I'll tell you how and why. Le déjeuner, after le petit déjeuner, le déjeuner, that's lunch. So, pour le déjeuner, vous pouvez manger de la viande, that's meat, de la viande. What kind of meat? Dinde, turkey, poulet, chicken, bœuf, beef, porc, pork, for example. Or du poisson. Very careful with the pronunciation of poisson. Pois, open, s, the snake sound. On, nasal sound, not poison. Very common mistake. Poison means poison. And poisson means fish. It's better for you if you go for fish. Poisson. Two types of fish that you should know because it's very common. I'd say thon, that's tuna, thon, and saumon, the salmon. Ok. Donc pour le déjeuner, je peux manger de la viande, de la dinde, du poulet, du bœuf, du porc ou du poisson, double S, such as du thon ou du saumon. And I can have des légumes. Légumes, that's vegetable in general, it includes everything. Des légumes, du riz, rice, or des pâtes, pasta. On a lighter note, you could have une salade. Une salade. Okay. I wrote like for the pour le dessert, of course, double S too. You could have an ice cream or biscuits or of course une glace, des biscuits, un fruit again of course, ou un yaourt. Yaourt ou yogurt, both are accepted. I think it comes from the Turkish root, if I'm not wrong. Greetings to our Turkish friends. Yaourt, yogurt. I think we're the only one to really use like both, no? Like yaourt, yogurt. I've heard yogurt many times, but yaourt not that much. And actually in France we use yaourt much more. Like in all the advertising and stuff, like for marketing reasons, they opted for yaourt much more than yogurt. Yeah, but both are completely fine. Yaourt, yogurt. D'accord. Then there is this afternoon snack that is at least very common for kids, maybe not for adults, but le goûter, this snack around 4 p.m. is very common after school. When kids come out of school, they have le goûter. Can be very healthy, can be less healthy. Again, parents go for viennoiserie pour leurs enfants, pour le goûter, but they can also have just un fruit. The typical pomme or une banane, une poire, like a fruit, and that's it, some fruit. Et c'est tout. Mais bon, it's also possible to give like des biscuits, des gâteaux, du lait au chocolat. That's one they like a lot. You could also give them like dried fruit. That's a very good idea. Fruits secs, such as noix ou amandes. Des noix ou des amandes for this afternoon snack. It's a good idea. So it's called le goûter en français. And then later on come le dîner. I didn't write much for dîner. I wrote if you go for a light dinner, une salade ou une soupe. Une soupe de légumes encore et une salade. We'll see later what we put in the salad, but I mean maïs, laitue, thon, poivron, œuf. You can put some eggs too. You can also have like du riz, des pommes de terre, potatoes. You could have that. Ok. Et là, les verbes que j'ai associés, c'est once more prendre. Alors prendre goes for the liquids that I haven't mentioned yet. It's coming now. Prendre, for example, de l'eau, water. Prendre de l'eau plate ou de l'eau gazeuse, with or without gas. De l'eau plate ou de l'eau gazeuse. Yeah? L'eau gazeuse, with or without gas. De l'eau plate ou de l'eau gazeuse. Yeah? Un soda, du jus de fruits, fruit juice, that's what we said before. And then for the alcoholic drinks, we have de la bière, prendre une bière, prendre un verre de vin, prendre une coupe de champagne, prendre, to have. And the expression to have a drink is actually prendre un verre. It doesn't mean literally just to take a glass. It's just have a drink. Prendre un verre. And we saw before like the verb manger, to eat, boire, to drink, préparer, to prepare, cuisiner, to cook, cuisiner, goûter, to taste. Like it's to try, but with food, to taste. Goûter. Exactly the same word as the snack. Le goûter. D'accord. And to end up this lesson, I thought I would give you some of the numerous vegetable and fruits that we have, like according to seasons, because it's interesting. For example, in January, you know the months in French. Par exemple, en janvier, février, mars, c'est très commun de manger des citrons, ou un citron, le kiwi, la poire, la pomme, la clémentine. You'll see the translation here, so I'll stick to French for this. Le citron, la clémentine, le kiwi, la poire, la pomme. And vegetable-wise, la carotte, la betterave, le champignon, le chou, les épinards. These are very common in January, February, March. And here are some fruit and vegetables. I don't want to give you a long, boring list of all the fruit and vegetables. Tomate, I think that I gave
you'll see that this whole floor tool is very well built and rugged, and we built it as a replaceable assembly filter. You get, as long as it's a green screen, I know that it has finished cleaning. So it becomes much easier for me. And cleaning zone. And we always end up back at the magic tag.
We built the R3 rack for anyone.
The R3 Scrub Pro, clean any debris inside, you can clear it out. So we can see how close to the edge it can clean. Now let's see.
We have our refuel station with the
Our R3 Scrub Pro also uses a magic tag system. So effortlessly, any cleaner can give the floors a professional scrubbing. So you can see it is getting ready. It goes to a countdown and it starts now. Let's see how well it cleans. I've got a lot of cigarette butts and food. Our R3 Scrub Pro
all situations and offers utmost high performance cleaning.
Shall we take a look?
Yes, let's see.
Our R3 Scrub Pro also uses a magic tag system. Our R3 Scrub Pro also uses a magic tag system. So effortlessly, any cleaner can give the floors a professional scrubbing. I've got a lot of cigarette butts and food and leaves. So we can see how close to the edge it can clean. Now let's see how well it will pick up the stains.